Hey everyone, this is Carlos. I'm the founder and CEO of Product School, and today I'm here with Emmanuel Straschnov, co-CEO at Bubble. Hey Emmanuel.
Hi, it's great to be here.
It's great to have you on the show. Let's talk about the no-code revolution. Your tool is really cool. I was telling you that one of my criteria to invite people to the show is if I like their product. And when I saw it, I realized that there's a lot of potential here, and I would like to learn more about kind of the story behind it. So why don't we start from the beginning? How did you decide to come up with Bubble?
So the story goes back to like a coffee shop in New York, where at that point I had graduated from school. I was in business school, and I got introduced to this guy who started working on something, a way for non-technical founders to start companies on their own. And he was looking for a tech co-founder, not a tech co-founder. I was actually not technical at that time. And we sat down for 2-3 hours. And at the end of these 3 hours, he told me, do you want to partner with me? I'd never met him before. It was the first time we had met. And I said, yes. And here we are today, 9 years later. So that's how it started. And so the idea, joke aside, I mean, it's not a joke, it's a real story. But more seriously, though, the idea that drove the first iteration of the product is there are a lot of non-technical founders who have ideas, who cannot get their product off the ground because, engineering it's tough to find engineers. And it's really a missed opportunity because a lot of these ideas may not lead to anything, but some of these ideas might actually be very good. So let's build a tool for them, because most of the time, a lot of the platforms that these people had in mind were actually similar. It's not like it was radically new. A marketplace for apartments or a marketplace for boats, it's pretty similar from a technical standpoint. And so that was the initial idea behind Bubble. And the truth is, it hasn't changed too much, actually. Today, our first target group, the people we really talk to the most are non-technical founders. Over time, it expanded to product managers, like people inside companies, but we're still very much focused on making sure people can start companies on top of us.
I remember when I was, my background is in engineering, but when I went to business school, there were a lot of business school folks saying, oh my God, we want to build something. Let's go to the engineering school and convince people to build our ideas. And I was thinking, well, that doesn't mean that engineers don't have ideas and they're eager to kind of capture something to build.
I was that guy, I was at Harvard in business school. I actually went through the pain of that situation because I had an idea in business school, terrible idea. I won't even talk about it, and I wanted to try something. And then I had to hang out at MIT to try to find a technical person that, I eventually found someone, but then she flaked on me after a few weeks, and it just never happens, right? And so that's why there is a real problem to solve. And it's the challenge of that is actually pretty deep. The problem with that is actually pretty deep. What that means is that people who have great ideas, but no access to engineers or funding, and usually it's the same, cannot get their idea off the ground. And in other words, engineering and software is only going to be used for people who have access to resources. And I think fundamentally, from a social standpoint, I found that very problematic. And so Bubble is our way to solve that.
Yeah, and you started this company long time ago. I think it was 2012.
Yeah.
12. And in reality, no code or tools like that, they've been around since forever, right? So what's happening? Why are more people talking about it these days?
So I actually think the question is more, why were people talking about code so much between 2010 and 2018? I think that's the real question. So because you're right, no code has been around forever. It wasn't called as such, but in the 80s, in the 90s, most of the tools that people were using were no-code tools. Like Front Page from Microsoft was a perfect example of this. And then what happened between 2010 and 2018, even 2012 and 2018, with the bootcamp bubble, like the hacker culture, I think comes down to the Web 2.0, Facebook, Airbnb, Dropbox, these kind of companies becoming very visible and valuable very quickly. And so that was part of the American dream a little bit. That's Silicon Valley. You can be like a teenager, do something in your dorm room at Harvard, and you become a billionaire, like Mark Zuckerberg. And so I think there was a lot of fascination with that. And when there is fascination, there is a little irrational things from people, and then everybody was like, oh, let's learn how to code. And that became all those boot camps. Governments were putting a lot of money into like coding programs and everything. And what happened in 2018, I think two things. First of all, people started realizing that it's not as easy as just saying learn how to code. code is not for everyone. I mean, I code, but not everyone enjoys doing it. And you can go through a boot camp, but it's not necessarily going to make you proficient enough and like it enough to actually do that of your career. And also tools that were trying to replace code got much better. And so these two things going together, tools like Bubble, to be specific, they became more powerful over time. And suddenly people were like, wait, why would I spend $10,000 in a boot camp, or I could learn this tool over a few hours and do pretty much the same thing? And in 2018, I think was a point where the comparison made no sense anymore. And therefore people started switching to no code.
We're part of that education revolution too. I started my company in 2014, right after many coding bootcamps promising people that, okay, you can get a coding job. And I know that there is a percentage of engineers who don't want to code and they want to leverage their technical background in a different way. And in a way, part of our hypothesis when we started Product School is that you don't need to be an engineer in order to build digital products. And now having access to incredible tools that support that hypothesis are making product people focus on things that they can add more value. That doesn't mean that they're not going to collaborate with engineers by any means, but like they can focus on kind of the non-coding piece, which is much bigger than the coding piece for a product manager.
Yep, exactly.
So in your case, I mean, you start this company in 2012. Kind of guide me through the process and what the status of the company today.
We actually have a very non-traditional history. So first of all, 9 years old for a company is fairly old, right, by Silicon Valley standards or tech standards. We decided very early on not to raise funding. So we never tried to really get funding. And our very first round of funding was in 2019, so like 2 years ago. And so what the first years of the company looked like was basically Josh and I, the two of us building everything ourselves. So for 5 years, it was just the two of us. It was a period of time where we didn't try to acquire many users. We did, you were talking about business school, so we went back to Harvard that I had graduated from to find some early users, because as you pointed out, there are a lot of potential users in places like this. So we started an early alpha there, gathered about like 10, 15 users from there, and from tech co-founder meetups in New York, where people were going to find tech co-founders, but couldn't find any technical person there. And so we had this little community of users, but very small, that was less than 50 users at every single point of time. And we would work with them to make sure they could build their companies on top of us. And just that kept us busy enough for more than 5 years, where we would basically do everything ourselves with a hard rule. We would not build their web app for them. We would just improve the platform so that they could build their web application on top of us without code. And then in 2017, so after 5 years of this, we started building a team, got to a team of 10 people, all bootstrapping, so all based on the revenue we were having. And then in 2019, we pulled the trigger on fundraising. And after that, I guess we had the more traditional trajectory that you would expect from a startup with, first of all, faster growth, hiring more people, like going through the cash you've raised, meaning profitability is not the goal anymore. Well, before that, we definitely had to be profitable, otherwise the business would have collapsed. And today, we're much more of a traditional startup. Retrospectively, it was actually a very good thing we did that way, because it gave us the time, like 7 years is a long time, without investor pressure and without too much user pressure either. We had a lot of pressure from our existing users to make sure the product was good enough, but we didn't have too many of them. And that gave us a lot of time to actually create a product that is extremely powerful. So today, when we tell people, you can build Twitter without code, we actually mean it. Not the scalability, but the functionality. But it took us about 7 years to get to that point. And today, I think that's what makes us a little bit different from the other no-code tools on the market. We spend the time to have this depth of feature that is kind of our moat, if you will, like it's something that is going to be hard to replicate. And now we're more into the period of actually try to expand it to more people, like again, a traditional startup would do after they raise funding.
I love that story. I think being bootstrap, I'm a bootstrap founder as well, teaches you that discipline to build for a specific set of users, make sure they're set up for success, and really think through all of those decisions, because you don't have much room for failure. So I'm curious now, how did your decision-making mindset change now that you have more capital and you are tackling a bigger user base versus before, which you had you said around 50 users. And so what are some of those big changes that happened to you as a CEO?
Well, we felt the product was ready to onboard much more users. What we realized before, like in 2014, 2015, and it's still the case today, actually, the first time someone sees Bubble, they're going to be skeptical. Oh, that sounds too good to be true. That's what we hear all the time. And so they're going to reach out to us and they're going to say, hey, I want to build this, I want to build that. And so back in 2013, 2014, 2015, people would do that. I was the one doing success myself, so I would answer those emails. And I'm a very honest person. I don't really buy in, the fake it until you make it mantra that Silicon Valley has. I think it works for some businesses and it's the right approach. For something like Bubble, where you have a lot of skepticism, I don't think it's the right approach. And so I was pretty honest with people and say, sorry, that's not the right fit, not yet, maybe next year, maybe in 2 years, but not right now. And what happened in 2018, 2019 is we were still getting those emails, but most of the time we were saying yes to people, because we have added, at that point, we had added enough functionality. And so then we were like, okay, well, now we can definitely have more users, because if they come to us, they would be able to use us. While before, had we raised money before that, we would just have spent money to acquire users, to tell them, sorry, no, you can't build that. It was just a waste of resources and waste of time. And so that change is what led us to fundraising.
Can you give me more examples of things that a non-technical person can build using Bubble, maybe examples of other businesses built on top of your platform?
Yeah, well, I mentioned Twitter because it's a real example. If you go to notrealtwitter.com, it's a Twitter clone built on Bubble, so that gives you a sense of what you can build. Obviously, it's not a business. It's more built as a way to showcase what Bubble can do. To give you some examples, we have like an Airbnb for dock sharing, so a marketplace, if you have boats where you can share your peer dock that someone has built. We have seen invoicing platforms like that people sell on a SaaS basis to freelancers. We have in France a company that distribute, customized vitamin supplements, where everyone gets a custom order based on the questionnaire they fill, based on their health. And the entire platform is built on Bubble. It actually reached more than 4 million euros of AR entirely on Bubble so far, for instance. We've seen people building internal CRMs, like basically replacing the entire suite of SaaS tools they were using, and decided to build their own internal tools on Bubble. So it's a very different use case. They're not trying to start a company on top of us. It's about 30% of the apps we see are actually internal usage, where people just would use us as a much more powerful Airtable, for instance. And then we've seen people actually develop like fun stuff in games. I mean, we had someone, I think he was in high school or right after high school, who started distributing Fortnite skins on Bubble when Fortnite was really hot. He was doing more than 50,000 uniques a day, which, if you know the web, it's actually a lot. Not many websites do that. And he did that on Bubble as well. Because it's a little bit all over. Bubble is extremely open-ended. It's sometimes a challenge we have when people ask us, can you give me some example of what people build? It's like asking someone, give me some example of what people build with React. Well, anything, right? And so Bubble is a little bit at the same level. It's much more open-ended than what people think, and much more open-ended than most of the other tools that usually we get compared to in the no-code space.
Yes, and I think those type of examples are really inspiring for non-engineers to realize that they can really build something that is real as customers, that they can really live off. And, because back in the day, there was this myth around, well, no code is just for basic tools or basic websites. But now I think we are all realizing that this is here to stay, and that you can build an entire business on top of it for both external products, but also internal tools.
Exactly. And not only is it here to stay, but it is here to expand dramatically, because it is so much cheaper. Like, to talk about like non-fun stuff, but serious things, at the end of the day, what makes a revolution like that take off is just because it's cheaper. Like at some point, the market forces are pretty simple, right? And so no code is so much cheaper to build than traditional code, whether you do it yourself or whether you hire people to do it, because it's faster to build and way more people can do it. That not only it is here to stay, but it's going to expand much more, because at some point it's going to make no sense to keep using code except to build very new things, because it's 50 times more expensive. So
how do you think about the relationship between no-code tools and coders or engineers? Is there any overlap there between, like doing something and then having an engineer to expand the reach, or do you think that that coding won't be necessary in the future?
So a great question. Actually, coding will always be necessary. And sometimes, when people talk about no code, you make the provocative claim that coders are going to disappear because it helps with media and interviews, but it's not true. Coders will always be around because similarly to today, you still have a lot of engineers in the world who work in assembly language when they need to build something that is lower level. And this is in particular true for Bubble. Bubble is probably the tool that plays the most with coders because it's actually a platform that you can extend with code. Well, most of the tools don't actually let their users do that. So most people on Bubble are familiar with our main editor, where you build your thing by dragging and dropping and then defining these workflows by saying, when the user clicks here, do this, do this, do that. But there is a different part of the product that lets you write code if needed. And then it's packaged into what in the Bubble world we call a plugin. And that can be an element on the page or an action that runs in a workflow. And so the world we're trying to design is a world where business people build product, or product people, actually, product or business people build product, and coders are only brought in when a feature is missing. And if you think about it, it's a much more effective way, efficient way to do things, because the beauty of that is that coders stop reinventing the wheel. When you look at companies like Lyft and Uber, for instance, amazing companies, do great things. The fact that both of these companies have thousands of coders writing code that basically does the same thing, because at the end of the day, one is pink, the other one is black, but it's pretty similar in terms of product, is a waste of resources, right? And so imagine a world where business people or product people can build these products and engineers only build something new. Suddenly you thread thousands, if not millions of good coders that could start working on new things. And so that's how no code should be interpreted. No code shouldn't be interpreted as we're going to get rid of coders. Should be interpreted as this is a way to make sure that coders only work on new things. And in that sense, I actually think no code should be the best friend of coders, because it's much more interesting to work on new things to keep rebuilding the same, login flows, sign up flows, the same web app all the time. I mean, at the end of the day, it's not very interesting to do that.
Yeah, no, thank you for clarifying that, because we have now some engineers in the chat asking what's going to be the future. And I agree with you. I see of no code just as another layer that just give more power to people to create. At the end of the day, it's about creators. Yep. And if you have the technical chops to go a few layers down to customize something when needed, well, that's also great. That can amplify the reach of what you are building. But by default, I think just the value proposition of, hey, you can go from idea to product faster and cheaper, it's really, really strong.
Yep.
So let's talk about education, because even though the learning curve is just less steep than for someone who wants to build something using code, I guess there's still some, barriers. So how do you go about that? How can someone who's never been exposed to anything like this can learn and build something?
So, I mean, that's honestly the biggest question for us, right? Because whenever you create a product, I've insisted on how open-ended Bubble is, right? So when something is open-ended, that means you have the mistake to do mistakes. If you have the freedom to do mistakes. If you have the freedom to do mistakes, that means you're going to make mistakes. That means you need to learn how to fix your own mistakes. And so that's why education first is so critical. So to your question, we're experimenting and trying a lot of things. So we've started with, obviously the usual things that you would imagine, creating interactive tutorials, videos, and a user manual. We started a forum that's extremely active when people can help each other. And recently, so over the last 12 months, we started something new, which is working very well now, which we started our own Bubble bootcamps. And so we were a little bit helped with COVID here, because now people are expecting to do this over Zoom, which makes it easier. And so we sell basically 8-week programs taught by expert bubblers from our community of users. And people teach these classes in small groups of 8 over Zoom. We've also started a coaching marketplace where people can book coaches by the hour, because what we've noticed is some users, after going through our material and different documentation, sometimes there is one thing that is blocking them, and as soon as you unblock that, then everything is more clear. And so for these people, like a half an hour or an hour of coaching with someone is actually very high leverage. So we try to find all the different offering that work best for people, given that most people have a very different learning style. We have users who the first thing they do when they sign up is actually not to try to build something, not to go through the lessons, is to read the user manual from beginning till the end. We have some people that don't even want to do the lessons, that go straight into building. Usually it doesn't work as well. I don't recommend that approach, but some people want to do that, right? And in the future, what's ahead of us is probably keep scaling these initiatives around bootcamps and education in general a lot, because I actually think that the biggest blocker for us for like a much bigger adoption is get more of the bubble skill and the bubble way to build out in the world, and trying to find the right places where we can amplify our educational efforts. So we're starting to work with colleges more, we're starting to work with bootcamp companies, we're starting to work with online after school services, to like the Udemy and these kind of platforms, to make sure that more content is out there so that people can educate themselves about bubble.
I think that's great. We actually leverage many tools for product managers, and we definitely mention no code as a really good way for them to not have to rely on anybody else to kind of build and ship something. So I'm glad to see that, but also I'm curious. You mentioned that your first users were mostly founders. Now, as you are expanding your market, you are seeing all kinds of users. What are some of them other than founders and PMs?
So it's mostly still founders. That's usually the people that we keep going for the most for, because I think that's one of the most exciting and most underserved categories to go with. Now we start seeing a lot of business analysts, salespeople, like people who have a very deep understanding of the need for the software that needs to get built. This is often for internal use. For instance, you're a business analyst on the team needs some kind of web application to manage the process. And if it's a larger company, or if it's like an SMB, the traditional approach would be to ask your boss to allocate some money for a development shop, or you go to the IT department and hope that maybe 3 years from now they'll do something for you, right? And it just never happens. And so what we start seeing is these people just building things on their own because that's a way to solve the problem. And so describing them in terms of title, it's a little bit hard, to be honest, because it can be anything, like it's usually business people, or business analysts. One thing I'd say is that I think only 25% of our users have tried code or design before in their life. So our users are actually much less technical than you would usually expect. Most of them actually come from like a purely non-technical background, but what they have is some kind of tech savviness, meaning, they've read enough about the web to know what an API is about. They wouldn't necessarily know how to use, Postman to do some requests, but they know that what an API is for and how they could leverage it potentially in some ways, and then they start using it in Bubble.
And how are you thinking about integrations? Because I guess that obviously there's some functionality that you want to build, but there's also other functionality that is already there that is working, right? Like if you want to process payments, for example. Or
right, so that's exactly what I was mentioning, right? We connect as Bubble, like Bubble connects to any kind of API. Like now the web is done in a way that most APIs are standard. It's all using the same kind of JSON-based RESTful API. And so we connect to any API like that in a generic fashion. So we have a plugin ecosystem. So you can, if you go on Bubble, you can create plugins, distribute them for a fee or for free, or build them from yourself. And then if something is missing, you can just add it on an ad hoc basis. Our approach is to be as open as possible. And then, we just launched an official integration with Zapier, so that if something is on Zapier but not on Bubble, you can use them. So we try to be as open to the world as possible, because the only way no-code tools can succeed in the long term is by integrating with other systems. If you don't, eventually you will hit a wall and people will have to migrate off your platform. It's actually, if I may, it's one way we describe ourselves versus the other no-code tools. Our goal is to be the platform that people don't migrate off for any reason. Depending on, and for feature reasons or scalability, our commitment to our users, and that's why we picked non-technical founders, because it was a more exciting place to start doing that promise. It's a little bit harder, but more exciting if you get it right, is to tell people, start a company on top of us and you'll stay with us till IPO. It's a very hard goal, but if you manage on doing that, then you've truly built something that is no code, but extremely powerful, and that's what we're aiming to be.
I mean, for me, it's very refreshing because when I started my career as an engineer, I had to build a lot of things, and now I'm very, very excited about being able just to connect things, to know that there are certain services out there that are really good at one specific use case, and that I can just plug them without anything very specific. You mentioned Zapier. We are big fans of Zapier.
I'm sure.
And it really gives all the power and control to the creator. At the end of the day, I think it comes down to that. It's like you can build something, might not be perfect, and of course I'm sure you can improve it in the future, but I think the power of putting something out there and being able and have it interact with customers before you involve engineers, designers, and other type of people, is what's really changing the way people build in the world.
Yep.
Back in the day when we would say product, people would think about something physical. Now I think another thing that is helping us when we say product, a lot of people also think of a website or a mobile app or something that is also a product you can build.
Yeah. I mean, that's very much what Bubble is about. We're about taking the power of creation and putting it in the hands of everyone. Which again, today it seems like a cool thing. 10 years from now, if we haven't succeeded, I hope someone else does, because it's starting to become like something pretty critical for the world. You can't imagine a world where only 1% of the, not even 0.1% of the population can create things online, and the other people are just consumers. That will not end well if you do it that way.
So when more and more people start adopting this type of products and kind of creating something becomes more of a commodity, what do you think are the key skills that are going to set apart a good bubble product versus a great bubble product?
Great question. I think user empathy, like the ability to put yourself in a fresh user and then testing your application and figure out, does it make sense to the user or not, is going to be a key thing in who defines what is a good bubbler and a less good bubbler. I mean, obviously then rigor and being organized, because at the end of the day, if you're building a fairly large and complicated web application, it is messy, right? It's going to be a lot of pages, a lot of views, a lot of data types, a lot of things that you're going to have to keep handling. So you need to be organized. And I think user empathy, putting yourself in the shoes of your users to make sure that the experience you are creating makes sense. Because again, Bubble is so open-ended that it's easy to go wrong if you don't think about those things carefully. The good news is, I think this is something that not only is not easy to teach, but it's very much teachable. And this is something that because people use computers more and more, they're more and more sensitive to these things. So as a user, like if you use Airbnb, if you use Airtable, you're going to be thinking, you're going to be experiencing good experiences, right? And so if you had a little bit of education on top of this, people pretty quickly will start developing a good sense, I think.
All right, Emmanuel. Well, thank you so much for your time. Last question, how can people find you online and learn more about how to build stuff on Bubble?
Plenty of ways. So if you Google Bubble, you'll find us. It's bubble.io. We are Bubble on Twitter, like @Bubble. If you find that, you would find me on Twitter. Like, feel free to reach out or anything, or LinkedIn. I mean, any kind of social platform. I'm usually pretty easy to find with my last name. So Emmanuel Straschnov on any of these platforms will get you to the right place.
Thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.